Hello, welcome back to Russ Recaps. Today I'm going to recap a 2017 biographical psychological drama named My Friend Dahmer. A true haunting story of a boy named Jeffrey Dahmer who struggles to get through high school until he starts a killing spree and becomes America's most infamous serial killer. So, without further ado, let's get into the video. The movie begins with Jeffrey on his way to school when he notices and stares at the corpse of a dead animal lying on the side of the road. And while all the other students are busy chatting, a jogging man on the sidewalk catches Jeffrey's attention. As he gets up from his seat to look at the man a little more, the bus driver immediately tells Jeffrey to get back to his seat, and he reluctantly does. Once Jeffrey reaches home, he sees his mother, Joyce, chatting with his new interior designer and introduces them. Apparently, the man has cerebral palsy, and Jeffrey starts making fun of him until Joyce tells him to stop. Jeffrey's house is quite close to the woods. He exits from the back door and later appears with a plastic bag with something in it. As he is walking down the street, two kids cycling ask him what it is. He shows them a dead cat and tells them that he's gonna dissolve it in acid. He then offers them to come see him do it. The kids go with him to a shed nearby where Jeffrey begins the process of dissolving the cat. He tells them the acid is weak, so it might take at least a month to dissolve completely. On being asked why he's doing it, Jeffrey says that he likes bones. The boys aren't convinced by Jeffrey's claims. That's when Jeffrey loses his mind and smashes one of the jars on the ground. The acid splashes all over the place, and lying there were the bones of the dead animal. The boys find it disgusting and flee, calling Jeffrey a freak. Later that day, Jeffrey has dinner with his parents. That's when he asks his father, Lionel, if he has a stronger chemical that he could use. Joyce keeps interrupting Jeffrey's talk with Lionel, who seems to be persuading Jeffrey to take up new opportunities. The next day in science class, John, a fellow student, is busy drawing, and when the teacher notices, she asks him to gather his stuff and go sit with Jeffrey. Jeffrey, who is not that fond of people, seems irritated. At lunch, Jeffrey is approached by his only friend, and as they are talking about the Neil Cicada concert, a bunch of bullies attack him. At home, Jeffrey watches his parents argue. Joyce wants to go back to work, but Lionel is totally against it since she got out of a mental facility. The scene changes to Jeffrey at a band practice. While exiting the hall, Jeffrey sees his friend getting bullied again and does nothing about it. Lionel returns home and asks David the whereabouts of the family. David tells him that he doesn't know where Joyce is, while Jeffrey is in the shed that he calls his lab. In the bedroom, Joyce is smoking when Lionel tells her that they need to talk about Jeffrey. He then breaks into Jeffrey's lab and throws away all the dead animal bodies that Jeffrey had stored over time. He believes Jeffrey is spending too much time in this animal cemetery and needs to get out of his shell. He then goes ahead and tears down the shed. At school, a boy named Fig approaches Jeffrey and tries to sell some weed to him. He then notices a trash bag that Jeffrey puts out and asks about it. Jeffrey says that he collects dead animals but is trying to quit. Back at home, Lionel apologizes to Jeffrey for his behavior and suggests him to be more social rather than hiding in the shed. The next day, Jeffrey is in the woods, setting a trap to kill a squirrel and succeeds. Time passes by and Jeffrey is now in his senior year. In class, he is asked about his thoughts on history, to which he gets nervous and says that he doesn't know in a made-up voice. He later flees from the auditions for the play. In the hallway, Jeffrey notices people looking at him and starts acting out. He pretends to have a spasmic attack and drop on the floor until the bell rings and things settle down. At this point, people think that Jeffrey is insane. However, at lunch, a boy approaches him and offers him to come sit at the table. They become friends and call him Champion Spazzer. Later that day, Jeffrey starts making weird noises again in the library and blames it on the other students. At home, Jeffrey wants to tell Joyce that he wants to have his friends over but sees his mom being hysterical, looking for smokes and pills. He urges her to go back to the doctor, but she's reluctant. His friends show up and tell him that they should hang out outside. Then they show up at a girl's house named Liz, pretend to be a reporter from school and try to embarrass her. The next day at school, a girl asks John if Jeffrey is his muse. He denies and proceeds to show her a drawing of Jeffrey that he just made. She then asks him to sketch her, to which Jeffrey replies that he can do it. Jeffrey makes her lie down and draws a chalk outline around her. The entire class laughs. The boys then go fishing, and as they are talking, Jeffrey seems to have caught a small fish. They tell him to cut it loose and throw it back, but instead, Jeffrey rips the fish open with a knife. He tells his friend that he just wanted to see what the inside looks like. Later, the boys are thinking about an epic prank they can pull for the yearbook. Jeffrey comes up with an idea that they should put his picture in every club photo, let alone the fact that he's in none of them. The boys like the idea and do it. The next day, John comes over to Jeffrey's place. Unfortunately, his parents are fighting again. Jeffrey seems embarrassed and John quickly leaves. On the same day, Jeffrey hides in the trees to go look at the jogging man again. He stares intensely as the man runs. After some time, the boys show up at a supermarket where John works. Jeffrey starts his shenanigans again and steals a few things before the owner confronts him. John is mad since the boys almost got him fired and tells Jeffrey to stop pulling pranks in public. As the boys are about to leave, the jogger shows up. Turns out he's Dr. Matthews, who lives in the neighborhood. Jeffrey goes back home and witnesses his parents fighting over a car that Joyce bought which they cannot afford. That's when Jeffrey sees a bottle of liquor and flees with it. The next day at band practice, Jeffrey reveals the fact that he's quit the band. That's when Fig shows up and pulls out a knife that belongs to his father and cuts his hand. He then goes ahead and licks his own blood. John warns Jeffrey to stay away from Fig, but he ignores. The next day, Jeffrey goes to the woods with Fig. They're looking for an animal to kill. Fig pulls out a gun and fires a bullet in the air and then puts the gun at his head, but fortunately, the chamber is empty. Jeffrey freaks out and runs from the scene. At school, Jeffrey shows up late to class. That's when his friends notice that he's drunk. On his way back, he finds a dead possum on the road. Jeffrey picks it up and dissects to briefly examine it. Later, for a class trip, Jeffrey gets paired up with the only black boy in class. He stares at him intensely and starts asking him questions about how he might be different on the inside, but eventually stops when things get too weird. On the second day of the trip, the boys are bummed about not being able to meet the president and decide to pull a prank. They call the vice president's office, hoping to meet him, and manage to set an appointment. As they get back home, Lionel comes to pick Jeffrey up. He breaks the news of him moving out of the house and that they are getting a divorce. Jeffrey appears to be saddened by the news. The next day, Jeffrey shows up at Dr. Matthews' clinic claiming to have a cold. The doctor does an examination and tells him that he's fine. Later, Jeffrey, who's obsessed with Matthews, masturbates to the thought of being touched by him. Jeffrey goes out with his friends but feels left out of the entire time. The next day, the boys wonder if they're taking advantage of Dahmer for fun, but later dismiss it while Jeffrey continues to drink regularly. Later, the yearbook pictures come in, and seeing Jeffrey in every photo, the boys love the prank they pulled until a teacher notices and blots Jeffrey out with a Sharpie. On the other hand, things at home get worse as the divorce is being finalized. That's when Jeffrey pulls a dog into the woods intending to kill it, but then call it off. Jeffrey and David then go to visit their dad, and Jeffrey gets a chance to steal some cash from Joyce's wallet. After the meeting, Jeffrey walks into his room muttering to himself. As he gets on the bed, there lies a dead body of a man, but fortunately it was all in his head. At this point, Jeffrey starts isolating himself from his family and friends. However, his friends plan on making him spaz one last time and ask a fellow student to film it. They offer him a sum of money to spaz, and Jeffrey agrees. Later, as they are driving to the mall, Jeffrey chugs a few cans of beer. At the mall, Jeffrey starts acting out and people get scared of him, while his friends are really enjoying the show. But since Jeffrey's drunk, things start to get out of hand until Jeffrey walks out, lost in his thoughts. Back at home, Joyce tells Jeffrey to keep it a secret that she and David are going to their grandma's house. The scene changes to Jeffrey hiding in the trees with a bat, waiting for Dr. Matthews to jog by, but he doesn't. Frustrated, he hits a tree with the bat and breaks it into two. After some time, a body of a butchered animal on the woods is found, and people believe that it's the job of a satanic witch cult. As the prom approaches, Jeffrey hears his friends saying that none of them want to go with him, but then he somehow manages to convince a young girl named Bridget to go with him. Jeffrey's intention was to shock his friends, and he accomplished it. Neil comes to him and apologizes for their behavior. Jeffrey accepts his apology and asks Bridget to the dance, only to ditch her after a while. The last day of school is now over, and while all the other students are happy about graduating, Jeffrey is emotionless. Jeffrey goes home only to find out that Joyce and David are leaving soon and that Lionel will attend his graduation. He knocks over some furniture before bursting into tears. Lionel attends his graduation and gives Jeffrey a car as a present. So one day, while John was collecting his last paycheck, he saw Jeffrey walking alone and offered him a ride. Seeing his bloody hands, John feels uncomfortable but tries to keep the conversation as normal as he could. Eventually they reach home and Jeffrey insists on them grabbing a beer together. John is reluctant but then agrees. The house is dark and Lionel is not at home as well. That's when all of a sudden Jeffrey walks up really close to John and creeps him out. John claims that he's supposed to go home early and walks out. Jeffrey silently walks behind him with a bat, planning to hit him, but John manages to get into his car quickly and drives off. Jeffrey wakes up the next day hungover from a night of drinking and drives around. He sees a man walking by and asks him if he was coming back from a concert. After a brief introduction, the two of them head back to Akron. And as it was stated in the title cards, the man was a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks, and he was never seen again. He was Jeffrey's first victim. Jeffrey Dahmer eventually got caught and confessed to the murders of 17 men. This is it for today. Please don't forget to subscribe and leave a like to help the channel out. Thanks for watching.